I was capital STRESSED. I was stressed like the whole time. Hi, I'm Gabe.
And I'm Kat.
And we're the Ghouls Next Door. Yeah, committed. We did it. Yes. Welcome to the Ghouls Next Door, the media analysis podcast from a horror lens where we explore historical, scientific horrors that influence our cinematic ones. This is a new month, so we tied up our anime series, but we didn't quite let it go because today we're going to be talking about an anime. But we're talking about a whole new topic that is quite horrific in a new way. It's truly traumatizing for us to watch these films and know how real they are and how unavoidable it is and what it says about people. It's the whole time.
Yeah. Weather murder is probably, other than ocean murder, one of my most feared things. Like, I don't know if people were, I feel like I said it in one of the episodes, but I used to have like drills, like weather preparedness drills, where I would leave my family to die every time because they didn't want to hide in my closet with all my Beanie Babies. But I would prepare like a go bag and hide in my closet every time it rained because I was like, it's definitely tornado hurricane. Like, fire-nado is happening right now. And if I do not get in my closet with like my Beanie Babies and a water bottle, I'm not going to make it. And I've resolved the fact that my family will not hide in this closet with me. So if I have to survive the post-weather murder by myself, I guess that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And that was like probably like age 5 until like 14. So it was a solid amount of time where I was just like, every time it rains, we could all die.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we're talking specifically about natural disasters this month. So we're going to tackle different ways that the earth and environment are trying to murder us because it's mad or it's just in a mood, and I get it. What are we? What are we to the earth, really?
Parasites.
Just a nuisance. Yeah, just a nuisance. Yep. I come from Florida, which I don't always like to mention, but we have hurricane season. We're not going to talk about hurricanes specifically, but I'll probably bring up some of those experiences because they've, drastically, had effects on my life as someone who's a Floridian. I remember when I first came up here, it was within the first few years of being here in Philadelphia that we had Hurricane Sandy, and I was like, they're following me now. We had an earthquake here in Philly my first year here, and I was like, what is this? I was like, what is happening? It was a whole time.
This is wild because we're not even in the realm of where earthquakes generally happen.
Yeah, it was super bizarre, but I was like, I didn't even know that could happen because when it happened, my mom used to live in this in her house where she had this really robust washing machine, and so when it was on its final cycle and it would like spin to dry, it would kind of shake a part of the house. So if you were like sitting in that part of the house, it would like shake. So there was like, I had an incredibly delayed reaction when the earthquake happened because my brain was just like, oh, the washer. And then I was like, oh no, I'm not at home. What am I supposed to do? And after it was over, I remember like peeking out and looking at all like my roommates, which I had too many. It was very, there's a lot of us in that house, peeking at all my roommates. And we were all like, we should have been in the doorway, or like none of us reacted appropriately. We were so delayed.
They were supposed to like do a thing.
Yeah. Yes. But that's honestly the only interaction I've had with earthquakes here on the East Coast. And I vaguely remember being worried when I traveled to San Francisco once, but it didn't happen. But I was just like, this is a place where that could happen.
Yeah. I never experienced, like, I know I was here when they happened, but I did not witness it. Like, my body was just like, nothing's different. Like, I did not realize the earthquakes happened until the internet told me they did. And I was like, oh, that's weird. And I feel like if I did ever, like, if, say, I was born in California, but I actively reject that, in that, not that I was born there, but that, like, so much weather murder happens there. And I maybe should be more equipped because I was born there, but I'm not. I feel like if an earthquake happened in real life, I would panic way more than is appropriate. Really would just think death is happening now. Not listen to any of the things that I'm going to advise other people to do today.
Yeah. And yeah, so today we're going to be talking specifically about earthquakes, and what that means, what they do, how to survive one of them, and also talk about media that covers earthquakes and their effects. There's quite a lot of earthquake-specific films that exist. I would say some of these other, like, natural disasters, it was hard to find media for, because like people aren't really taking it seriously, or they were like funny things. But today we're going to be talking about the anime Japan Sinks 2020, which, you know, was far from comfort TV during the pandemic. It is definitely not that. It was also affected by the pandemic in some ways. Specifically in that there was supposed to be mention of the 2020 Olympics in Japan, and they were like, that's delayed.
Yeah, that didn't happen.
We can't, that's not, which is super real, right? And to think like a different kind of, you know, event could occur that's so dramatic, instead of, you know, Japan Sinks 2020. But yeah, well, why don't we jump in to our content? We're doing things a little differently from what you might have seen last month with our guests. We're going to start with our film analysis, and then we're going to dive into Cat section, where we'll actually talk about, like, what is an earthquake? What does it do? How do you survive?
Why be scared?
Yeah, why is it terrifying? Because it truly is. So let's talk about the media for today's episode. So the first thing is the film we're going to talk about. An earthquake in New Orleans opens up a series of fissures around the city. A family discovers there is a greater danger at hand. A species of giant, fire-breathing spiders has evolved deep underground, and the seismic activity has awoken them from hibernation and allowed them to cause mayhem on the surface. That's not Japan Sinks 2020. That's good. That is Arachnoquake, which is absurd. Absurd. One of these. There are so many ridiculous films in which there's some type of natural disaster that awakens or changes the way that certain creatures exist. And in this case, it's fire-breathing spiders, which is not the only instance of fire-breathing spiders that we'll probably hear about. But I thought that was fun because I was like, oh, it's so fun. That is not what.
That's so. I just feel like any fire-breathing spiders, even if it's a funny movie, I would be so horrified the entire time.
Yeah. It's not.
100%.
It's not. It's absurd, and I can't imagine what it looks like on screen. But I think it would be really fun to play in that, to be like, oh, the fire-breathing spider. Like,
yeah, should be an actress.
Crawling with giant spiders. Oh my God! What part of jumbo spiders don't you understand?
Time to show Daddy Longlegs how we roll on the bayou.
And how rude, you know, like you're trying to survive. There is an earthquake. Everything you know and love is dead. And now there's also spiders. Like, why? Rude.
That breathe fire.
Like not even just normal spiders that are terrifying. Yeah, exactly. But here's a real summary. I hope you guys had fun with that one. Japan Sinks 2020. An ordinary family is put to the test as a series of massive earthquakes throw Japan into total mayhem. From director Masaki Yuasa, who also did Devilman Crybaby, but I like to say Devilman. because it's fun. And this is the first anime adaptation of the best-selling science fiction novel by Sakio Komatsu, which I will talk about at length. But it is, I'd actually kind of recognize the art from Devilman Crybaby, but it was like I've only watched like 2 episodes because it's a lot. Crybaby is a lot to deal with. I pitched it loosely for our anime section, but just couldn't figure out a way to weave it in to the way that we approach media. But it's fun, and this is like so different from that in the way that like it's more realistic in the way that the art is happening, because Devilman gets really weird. Like there's those really strange like body movements and the way that the body is portrayed. It's kind of body horror in a lot of ways.
Gotcha.
But he, also took on this, which is based on that. It's one of many adaptations of the novel by Komatsu. So this is a rather heartbreaking anime that cuts to the heart of the effect of natural disasters on people. Kat like offhandedly mentioned, she actually spoiled in an earlier episode. I don't remember which one it was, so I'm sorry for anyone who did it. She spoiled something.
That's real. That sounds like something I would do.
In like episode 2, I think it was, where you were like, oh, and then this thing happens, and I was like, what? And so when I watched it, I knew that was going to happen, but I was still absolutely just like, that is so rude.
Devastating.
This is the way this happened.
Yeah.
Like, you cannot do this to me. It's really, like I said, heartbreaking, and you feel really intimately connected to the family, and it's an honest portrayal of what happens during that I felt was really authentic, because, a lot of the times in disaster films, we spend a lot of it like running from the thing, or the majority of it, like next week we'll see, is like people avoiding the truth, and then it happens and it's like, oh, and we only get like 5 seconds in the trauma. Whereas this, because it's a TV show, it takes a lot more time. We can spend more time with the characters, and the fact that it's still going, like it's not just one event, it's several events, and they all have like these repercussions and other things that come from it, like earthquakes are the cause of like everything. So there's this bigger thing that's happening. So we get to spend a lot more time with our characters, dealing with a lot of the trauma surrounded with it, which is super authentic and great. Like I said, it is adapted from the novel Japan Sinks by Sakio Komatsu, but it does take a different approach from the book, in that the book was kind of created as a warning about imminent disasters that await Japan, which Kat will explain in her section, like what those horrors are.
Yes.
Like what it is very real. And that's what you'll find, like, in this section, and also in the film too. This is not like just fun and games. We're not making, putting The Rock in a San Francisco movie about earthquakes just to show cool effects. Like, this is real. This is actually a scientific representation of the truth, so that we can, educate people. But the novel specifically, it's backwards on here, but the novel specifically follows the scientists and the politicians who are dealing with the earthquake and the impending earthquakes, and kind of the politics that go along with kind of talking through the possibility of it, and, the delaying tactics and all the things that go through it. So similar to like Bong Joon-ho's The Host, the TV show Chernobyl, which we talked about briefly at some point, and even Godzilla, which counts as an earthquake film. You look it up, Godzilla is an earthquake film. Those all seek to like explore how governments or like the higher ups are handling the natural disaster. So it's like, what decisions are being made from up here to like save the people, or, not acknowledge the dangers that are right in front of us, even though the scientists are telling you. Like, there's so many, like, this really reminds me of Chernobyl, where like the first few episodes are them being like, this is going to happen, it is dangerous, it is scary, and then it's like, it is happening, it has happened, what are we going to do? And people being like, it's nothing happened, there's nothing to be worried about, what are you talking about? And so the book was similar to that. So we'll also see in like next week's episode about how, they'll also delay certain reactions because they don't want to alarm people and they want to avoid panic. And so then, like, the scientists or the people who are, calling it out often get gaslit or dismissed because it's like, no, you're overreacting. There's no way that something that big could happen. Or, oh, yeah, something that big could happen, but it's not happening now. Right. And it's like,
Yeah.
but it is. Let's talk about it. So the first thing I want to unpack in this series is, does the content that we're covering accurately represent the horrors of a natural disaster? And so I found in an article on the NYU Gallatin from writer Naho Sakami explains the novel's influence on the differences between the novel and the show. And so it's titled Japan Sinks. And in it, it explains that Komatsu's novel was actually really timely in that it served the purpose of informing the public of the very real threat of an impending earthquake. So in the article, they say that Komatsu, began writing his story in 1964, which collides with the first science journal publication on seafloor spreading and continental drift, and 1969 was the first article published on plate tectonics. It was only in the middle of the 1970s that the Japanese geological community gradually began to accept plate tectonic theory, and it took another decade for it to become widely accepted. So this takes place in the 1970s, so he was like at the head of the game of being like, this is something that is being scientifically proven and people aren't hearing about it like right away. And so Komatsu's decision to follow a scientist, specifically struggling to get government officials to listen and seriously consider the impending disaster, is strategic. Like, it was the point of actually critiquing what was happening in real life at the time. And because at that time, it was very likely that many would dismiss or misunderstand the gravity of the situation. Sakami, the writer of this article, goes on to explain that this explains why Komatsu presented Tadakoro, which is the scientist in the novel, as a geophysicist that studied abroad instead of a geologist. In Japan Sinks, Tadakoro was laughed at by the cabinet members and other Japanese scholars, and the only reason they do not entirely dismiss his idea is because he must be smart, since he is recognized by the U.S. science community. Japan Sinks presents real-life conflicts and differences in scientific understanding. In terms of the general public's understanding, Japan Sinks must have played a huge role in spreading the knowledge of plate tectonics through millions of copies sold and viewed in theaters. So as far as like, all of that is to say, is this accurate in its representation? Yes, because the whole point of it was to inform the public about this natural disaster in a way that would be understandable for them. So yes, it was being in scientific journals, but there was a different way to show that, get that information to the public, as well as, get ahead of any kind of pushback to be like, government, if you're going to push back on us about what we're showing you, we already predicted that you were going to do that in this book. So, I also, unlike most disaster media, where the science and the actual event kind of take a backseat to the people-focused plots, the book and the many adaptations that followed were intending to do both. Where it was like, this is very heavily science related, but it also shows how people are going to react to the situation. And it shows us the truth of what lurks beneath our feet and explores the effects it has on humanity. The other thing I want to unpack for this series is what this film or media is trying to tell us about humanity, because that's the gist of what we do here. So in Japan Sinks 2020, it decides to it takes a completely different route in that it decides to ignore the higher-ups completely and instead focuses on a specific family that is fighting to survive. And so in an article that I found on Asahi Shimbun, titled "In 2020 Reboot of Japan Sinks, The Disaster is No Longer the Star" by Atsushi Ohara, it goes on to talk about director Masaki Yuasa in his decision to change our story's protagonists from the scientists who are in the higher-ups who are making these executive decisions and actually put us right in the middle of the action to the people who are being affected by it. And so he said, The original novel confronted Japan with fear at a time when the country was living it up. But now, after we experienced the 2011 earthquake, the fear is real, Yuasa said. So I thought I should portray how people think and live in a world where Japan has sunk instead of taking an omniscient point of view. So seeing exactly what people are way more aware of now in 2021 than they were in 1970, because we have already experienced those natural disasters on a smaller scale than what is predicted. But it's like we know even what these small ones can do. And he also goes on to say, I thought it would be realistic when people have no time to accept the deaths of their loved ones and have no choice but to flee from the spot, feeling the sorrow and fear that comes afterward. Because, through their experiences that we as the audience get to see the heart of the issue that arises from natural disasters, which is the anxiety and fear and the loss of your community and your home and the people that you care about and the fact that you have to just keep going. And that was like really impactful as a viewer to watch, because like we have to live these experiences alongside the Mutos and live in the same anxiety as them. Like we don't even know who's going to survive, and no one is safe. Like there are protagonists that are the head of this story who die and just die in these really graphic and honestly like traumatic ways. Like I was capital STRESSED. I was stressed like the whole time because I was just like, what? Like no one is safe, and you're forced, because especially in binge culture, right, to kind of consume the whole thing. So you're also kind of rushing as well, because you want to know what's next. Like you're like, I need to know how they're going to get from point A to point B. And I think Yuasa does an incredible job of moving us forward through the action and showing the vulnerability of people fighting to survive. Because we see people die in these like brutal, quick, shocking ways. And because we have to keep moving forward, like we alongside them don't even get a moment to grieve. So there's a lot of times where they are just pushing forward and they have to kind of put aside their survivor's guilt and those moments that they could have took to grieve and just move forward and try to survive. And we're also doing that. And I think there was a very human way to portray these characters that because, the mom in this is like awesome. She's phenomenal as a mom. And there are times where, she has this disagreement with her daughter because she isn't grieving a character the way that the daughter feels like she should. And it was super real to be like, I can't. I have to take care of you. Like, I can't feel bad. I can't be sad. Like, we have to survive. And I know it seems like I'm being insensitive, but I literally have to shut off that part of me in order for us to move forward. I also think, last month we talked about the beauty in anime showing us this ability to give us emotional and realistic villains, right? And in this, the bigger villain is, the earthquake, right? But I think the show actually shows even more real villains in that it shows our fellow humans who are adapting and reacting to the trauma. Because I think what hit me the most when watching the show was not the natural disaster or even the deaths, which were quite impactful. Instead, I found myself caught up in the idea specifically of Japanese identity, which I was not expecting when I came in. I was like, oh, I'm so emotional. There's this family. I get it. But there's all this little weaving in of what the Japanese culture is and what these Japanese people are experiencing, and just Japan as a whole, because it is Japan sinks, right? Like, it's not just like, oh, a natural disaster happened. Japan is sinking. Like, it is going to be gone. And so there is a strong critique against nationalism. And if you're familiar with our show here at the Ghouls, we're strongly against nationalism most of the time, because it can be really toxic and harmful. And we, believe we're all one people, and that if we can set aside those things. But there's another part to that in just being, proud and acknowledging your culture and history and loving it and appreciating it, and then being like harmful to other people because they're not that. Right? Like they're, and I think this show really approaches both sides of that coin really well. There so many instances where we see these harmful ideologies at play, like including a ship that won't allow anyone who is in a full-blooded Japanese person on it, excluding our entire protagonist group because they're a mixed family, because the mom is from the Philippines. So in that same article with Asahi Shimbun, Ohara goes on to say that the series, which introduces the character of Ayumi's mother as an energetic, optimistic woman from the Philippines, also doesn't flinch from the dark side of Japanese society, with scenes depicting discrimination against non-Japanese characters and Japanese trying to exclude them, which happens quite a lot. And I think, like, though we are, given that look at some of those toxic ideologies and like people who are like, this is the perfect way to be, and if you're not that, then you're out. It kind of reminded me of the Blood Quantum, where we were talking about like you're stacking the pebbles, and it's like they're, that's not the same effect. That's how I felt when I was watching them. Is like that they're saying like you're reducing us to pebbles. But we also see a critique on the loss of Japanese culture and pride, specifically with the character Go, which is the youngest member of this family, who's like this little nerdy boy who loves social media and technology and is really appreciative of Western culture and has aspirations to leave Japan, and it has all these like offhanded comments about how Japan is like not that great quite often, and like he just doesn't like it. He's also mixed, and so he probably has some effects from people that like off screen probably had to deal with that as well. But I think like even with him and in his interactions throughout the show, he is interacting with characters who are proud of their Japanese heritage, and they kind of instill that in him. Like, you should be proud of this. Like, you should be proud of this sumo wrestler, or you should be proud of the food. Like, you should enjoy the food. You just didn't have the food right. Yeah. Like those kinds of things. And to show him, and by extension, the audience, what to value in this Japanese culture, because it is at risk of being lost forever. And so I think even like in the end, when we see there's an attempt to rebuild, there's intentionality in preserving the beauty and history of Japanese culture, which would just be lost with the island, which is another critique in in that, like, if we keep ourselves, in our little islands and remote and away from the rest of the world, then we're also going to be away from the rest of the world when there is danger, and that we're at risk of losing everything by being so exclusive. When I'm watching this, I was thinking of the tactic in war when they like burn down libraries or museums and things like that to like kind of like that's a tactic. It's literally there to like erase your country's history and what made your country that, like your memories of your country. And Japan Sings 2020 has this really great way of blending and having this balance between criticizing the toxicity of nationalism, which only has praise without criticism of your country, and with that discrimination of the other, and like this push for the need of an appreciation and an understanding of one's culture, which is like a hard thing to do both. And I found that very inherent in the work. Another big departure from the novel, which is due specifically to the time in which it takes place, because the novel and other adaptations, which are direct adaptations from the book, take place in the 1970s. And this takes place in 2020. So, of course, there's going to be a difference. The big difference is that they use social media and technology as a means of connecting people. So we have a character who quickly becomes a favorite, I think, who is a YouTuber. Right. And he's like, I was wary of him. And he was a big surprise being how smart and fun and sweet he was, because not to generalize, but people often associate YouTubers with culturally insensitive brats who kind of exploit other countries for clout. Think Logan Paul when he went to the Aokigahara forest and recorded some really sensitive things there with no understanding of the culture. Whereas Kato in this show has an intense appreciation for Japan and the other places that he visits, even more so than Go at times, where he's like, you don't even know how amazing your country is. And I'm going to tell you, because as an outsider, I can see that. You know, I can see what the beauty is because I don't have that. You know, and also simultaneously being like, here's some things from where I come from. It's beautiful and great, but it's not the only thing. Like there's beauty everywhere. And I think that was really amazing. He was like a breath of fresh air during this. I was like so worried. But technology plays a really important part in this in keeping people informed and connected. So videos and photos are used to preserve Japanese culture and history, but are also there to hold the memories of the people that we lost and kind of recreate them. Like we talked about in one of our apps episode about resurrecting loved ones through technology. It's like we put so much of ourselves online and in these photos that we can preserve life in a way. Like we can revisit people we care about in this very unique way using technology. But on the other side of just preserving memories, it's also used as a form of information gathering. So people use Twitter and other social media to get information of what's happening around them so that they can make decisions to communicate with one another and strategize towards survival. Because it's like, okay, the left of this island is danger. That's what they're saying on Twitter. Oh, we're getting news that we should go to X location because there's someone there. And the only reason they can do that is because they have social media, which is phenomenal. And it's like, again, that's only going to happen with the fact that it exists in 2020. Another article that I found, or well, actually Kat found, thank you, Kat, is on Thrillist, and it's titled Netflix Disaster Anime Japan Sinks 2020 is the Perfect Metaphor for This Bad Year. And it is by Campbell. And in it, they explain that by the end, the show's critique of Japanese nationalism as the real doom of Japan is crystal clear. The archaic desire for isolationism and purity not only meaning death in the short term, but in the long term too. The series posits that without connection, there is no memory, and without memory, death is truly the end. A lot of that memory is enabled through digital technology, which here mostly exists as a way of personal connection, remembrance, photos, and videos becoming loaded with meaning and history. Especially in a time where a lot of people are holding together through the usage of such digital communication, Japan Sinks truly hits home. And that's to speak to the fact that we're currently living in a time where we're all connecting to one another because of technology and are able to do this virtual thing. Like people are not in my face. Kat is not in front of me, but she is in the way that we're able to be close to technology. But I think overall, though this is taking place 50 years after the original media, the horrors of an earthquake destroying Japan, threatening to erase its history and culture and the impact it has on human lives hasn't changed much at all. Like the bear, like that bear part of the story is still very much there. It's just how do we react? What do we find more important? What can we do to change it? How can we continue to find hope? And, you know, I think the powers that be are still more likely to dismiss and delay information to avoid panic. That's just kind of what comes with that. And I think mostly is that this media, the Japan Sinks 2020, is doing the same thing that the book sought out to do, which is be used as a tool for education. Only this time, it's not just the scientific and political horrors, but also the personal ones. And I think what we can learn from this anime that the novel and other adaptations missed is that humanity can prevail and that there is hope and we can support one another and grow and rebuild it. Because we have that technology, right? Because that's what they use in the end is like, we can replicate what we lost with the historical, like, like the feeds. Like we're using everyone's social media to recreate what this place looks like. Like we wouldn't have that in 1970. So I think that's one thing that's like super hopeful and cool. And I really loved about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's also like interesting. You have like this, the science really plays a part, and then like there is a way, as you said, to like preserve it. But that I was when you're talking about Twitter, I was really thinking about how like during the protests, Twitter and like Instagram were used as like ways to communicate. Roads that were like blocks that were safe, like that didn't have heavy police presence, and that it's all very like quick and live, so you're able to really track where things are going. So that's, I mean, outside of your phone battery dying, like it is a really useful tool in disaster or emergency scenarios to really like stay connected with what's happening. And that's both positive and can be really overwhelming, as I think like you and I can both attest to from the start of the pandemic. Like I would spend hours looking at articles on updates on like what's happening. But that became like kind of like obsessive. Yeah, exactly. But it can become kind of obsessive when you're dealing with like the shock of the initial issue. But yeah, this media does a really good job at showing it, and was really stressful. It made me cry more than once.
Yeah, I cried. I legit cried. I was like, this is so... I had to take breaks in between certain episodes and like put in something happy for a minute, because I was like, whew, I think after like the one episode that you spoiled, Kat, we actually took like, I want to say several weeks before we jump back in, because I was just like, I don't know if emotionally I'm in a good place to watch this. You really have to be prepared for sadness.
Yeah, it's very heavy. It's definitely very real and very heavy, in that like the tragedy is very human tragedy. Like, and death happens as unexpectedly as death happens in real life. And when characters are lost, you kind of just have this like, the show does a really good job, as you were talking about, like showing how like you don't even get a second to fully grasp the loss that just happened, and you just kind of have to keep going. But what I'll get into in my section, which is definitely very real, is that there's definitely this underlying thing where it's like, the government, did they know that this was going to happen? Did they, like, I think that's like the theme of the book, is like the government kind of dropping the ball on this earthquake is going to happen. Are we preparing for it adequately enough? And what's interesting is that now that the technology has advanced to what it is like there are predictions for Japan, specifically around large earthquakes that could trigger other natural disasters such as tsunamis, or I believe Japan actually has like a handful of volcanoes, things like that, that could be activated if such a large earthquake were to take place. So I guess I will get into what I was going to talk about, which is, what is an earthquake? I feel like I always knew the answer to this, but I didn't know how to eloquently explain it. So we're going to thank Michigan Tech for their helpful information on earthquakes, called Why Do Earthquakes Happen? And it goes on to say, earthquakes are usually caused when rock underground suddenly breaks along a fault. The sudden release of energy causes seismic waves that make the ground shake. When two blocks of rock and two plates are rubbing against each other, they stick a little. They don't just slide smoothly. The rocks catch on each other, the rocks still pushing against each other, but not moving. But after a while, that not moving builds up pressure. And when the rock breaks, that's when the earthquake occurs. During which, during and after, the plates or blocks start moving, they continue to move until they become stuck again. So the spot underground where the rock breaks is called the focus of the earthquake. The place right above the top of the ground is called the epicenter of the earthquake. And I think the most scary thing about earthquakes is that they are the trigger for a lot of other issues. They are also have the capacity to be man-caused. So if like with drilling or interacting with the spot or the fault of the tectonic plates, if people have explosions underground, this can trigger seismic activity. We'll talk about this more when we cover the wave next week, but there is ways that humans can interact with these underground explosions, such as like, I guess if we have mines, if they collapse, roof of walls collapse, that can trigger like underground seismic activity. Not to the same extent of tectonic plates causing it, but it can also trigger it. And especially in areas that are coastal, like most of Japan, that can result in really like dangerous things. So why do earthquakes happen? The CDC outlines this as called staying safe during an earthquake. The section of their website, there are 3 necessary steps they say are almost always able to happen, which is to drop, cover, and hold on. They do go on to like kind of outline instances where this isn't a thing, specifically if you were outside, I believe in like tall buildings, stuff like that. But they outline that on the CDC website if you are interested. But essentially, the drop down onto your hands, knees before the earthquake knocks you down. This position protects you from falling, but allows you to still move if necessary. Cover your head and neck and your entire body, if possible, underneath a sturdy table. We actually see this shown in the anime when the son hides under he tries to. He was in the hallway and he rushes to the dining room table to hide underneath so that nothing can fall on his head. Hold on to your shelter or to your head and neck until the shaking stops. Be prepared to move with your shelter if the shaking shifts around. There are instances where this is not possible. We kind of see in the anime that the daughter, she's in a room filled with lockers. There's nowhere to hide underneath. All these things kind of like fall onto her because of the magnitude of this earthquake. So there are some instances where, unfortunately, there's no real good thing you can do other than just try to hold and protect yourself as best as you can and hope that you're okay at the end of it, and then afterwards trying to find somewhere safe to go. But if you are interested, if you have a deep seated fear of earthquakes, and as I like to call them, earth shake murder, is one of the many ways that the earth can attack us. You can go to the CDC website and kind of learn more. But why does Japan make a lot of earthquake and natural disaster films? It's actually pretty spot on. To put it simply, it's because Japan experiences a lot of natural disasters, and it is situated in an area called the Pacific Ring of Fire, which is a string of volcanoes and site of lots of seismic activity that surround the edges of the Pacific Ocean. Pacific Ocean, not Pacific Ocean. Oh my gosh. It's to be expected that living in such an area would influence the media being created. According to National Geographic, roughly 90% of all earthquakes occur in the Ring of Fire, and the ring is dotted with about 75% of all active volcanoes, which I thought was terrifying on Earth. Being situated in this ring makes adapting to these kinds of natural disasters a part of everyday life and necessary for survival. In an article titled "Tokyo will probably face a massive earthquake in the next 30 years. The only thing they can do is prepare," written by Jake Sturmer and Yumi Asada. They go on through some of the many earthquakes Japan has experienced over the years, but also the very real risk that Japan is situated in with a large earthquake taking place in the next 30 years. It goes on to highlight the Tokyo Yokohama area, which is known by the Swiss reinsurance company, by far the most earthquake-threatened area, with potentially more than 30 million people affected. With this looming risk, the government has modeled potential impact of various earthquake scenarios, mostly with the understanding that thousands of people will die, and even more without preparation. So kind of the impact of these earthquakes will very much depend upon the preparation that takes place for the earthquake itself, but also the imminent threat of tsunami after said earthquake. Because once the seismic waves are released, it can affect, as we'll talk about next week, the impact of tsunamis. I said earlier, I've never experienced an earthquake firsthand. I believe the one that happened in Pennsylvania, I was in a car or asleep, and I did not know that they happened. And I still to this day have not felt the effects of an earthquake myself. And I will say it is 90% of the reason I'm like, no, I don't need to live in California. I don't want to know what that is. I don't know what it is. like I'm very scared of it. And there's definitely many times I'm like, why on earth would anyone live under constant threat of weather murder? Like, I very much relate. I was like, humans used to be nomadic. I don't know if it was to avoid weather murder, but I feel like that was definitely a part of it. So in an article titled "Japan's Fantasy Films Act as a Buffer Against Reality in the Natural World," written by Thomas Santinel, he actually highlights Hayao Miyazaki, who does Spirited Away, Ponyo, a million other amazing films. But he kind of outlines why my fears are kind of silly, in that like this is stuff that happens naturally in the world. So in this article, he quotes Miyazaki saying, "There are many typhoons and earthquakes in Japan. There's no point in portraying these natural disasters as evil events. They are one of the givens of this world in which we live. I am always moved when I visit Venice to see that in this city, which is sinking into the sea, people are carrying on regardless. It is one of the givens of their life, in the same way that the people of Japan have a different perception of natural disasters." While that did not make me think like, hey, right now, I need to like adapt to weather murder at any point. Like, it is very true that like this is a natural thing. This is something the Earth is going to do with us or without us. Like, we are not the deciders of what the planet is going to do, and trying to manipulate the planet is not going to result in victory for us. Like, all that we can really do is prepare and adapt around these scenarios. And you kind of see in the anime that like sometimes it's gonna happen, like disaster's gonna happen regardless. If the government knew about the fact that Japan was going to sink, should they be preparing the population more? Yes. But you also have this idea that like panic and quality of life, if you're constantly terrified of these things, what would that be like? But I think it's really interesting the perspective that Miyazaki presents, because it's honestly very real that there's a resiliency and like strength in humanity to adapting to these things. Otherwise, we would not still exist in this world without this kind of resiliency that comes from just adapting constantly to the way the Earth keeps changing. And I think also just acknowledging our contribution to the intensity of these natural disasters. While they are natural, I believe we have way more hurricanes than we used to have. Like the weather itself, weather murder is way more up in terms of ways that we have influenced the environment. And there are also ways that humans can interact with the planet that causes like movement in areas that we wouldn't necessarily want to have movement. But yeah, it's very scary.
It kind of reminds me
but also
of,
hopeful.
Yeah. It kind of reminded me of Neon Genesis Evangelion, where it was like the angels are, you know, the next evolutionary thing, and they're like, we're here to just, you know, do our job, which is to take this over. And the fact that humans were like, no, like, you know, a third of the population remained, and they were still like, we got to keep on trying to avoid complete annihilation and preserving like each other and the hope that it was. And that's why like at the end there was this like, you know, philosophical hope in that like we can prevail as humanity just because like we can remember, right? Like other as opposed to other animals, right? Like they're not going to remember. They don't have value in culture and remembering and history, right? That we do. And so as long as we can continue to preserve that, we can continue forward and we can replicate it. We have the science to replicate history and, you know, preserve it in that way too. And I think like the film does or the show does a really great job of showing like so like all the aspects of a natural disaster, because I think so often we get caught in the spectacle. Like I had this conversation with Mike about how I was like, oh, when I was looking up earthquake movies, Godzilla popped up, and that's because to Japanese audiences, Godzilla is an earthquake. Like that's what he is representative of, and like the way that their government handles those situations, and that it's like he's also man-made, right? But to an American audience, when we have Godzilla, it's like big monster fight. Like it's so much more about just like we're not learning anything. We're just doing, you know, that like thing. So I think it was such a good
cool
way
big
of,
monster man.
Yeah, like, and now it fights other big monster. Woo! Instead of it being like we're talking about natural disasters and our ecological effect on the environment, those things too. Which is why I'm wearing my recycling earrings. I wanted to.
Oh, cute!
Yeah,
I thought they were people or trash earrings. I wasn't sure if that's what it meant.
It could be that as well, but they're like little recycling ones. Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. It's true. People are also trash. I was pleasantly surprised by the turn of it not just being like oh, it's scary, right? Like, oh, big, disasters are scary. When things sink and there's, it's an unstable ground and people you love die. It was so much more than that. It was like again, there's like an earthquake movie with, I think, The Rock, and it's just like, it's just spectacle. It's just for like, look at that. You're not really learning anything. It's just like, it's like when we have Sunshine or whatever, where we sent a nuke to reignite the sun. Like, that's just fun. That's not real science.
Yeah.
And it's not, like, I don't understand why the logic
It's not something we're actively afraid of it.
Yeah. And why can't astronauts learn how to mine versus teaching miners how to be astronauts? Like, that doesn't add up to me, but
yeah.
And the other thing I watched that made me think of this when you're talking about man-made interactions is a film we will not cover probably because of Kat's like fear of the ocean, Underwater, with Kristen Stewart, because they're mining. The whole thing is that they're mining and they cause this they awaken things and they cause disasters, and the whole thing was this piece against the propaganda of natural gas like us using our resources and destroying our planet, with like it's also stressful, like fast-paced action film, but that was also, I was pleasantly surprised because I was like, whoa, this is like BioShock. Like, this to me is like, we are subliminally talking about like propaganda and like big gas, like, and also there's monsters here, and the underwater is scary. Why would we be there?
The ocean is so scary. You were live tweeting me while you watched that, and I was like, in no world ever would I want to watch that film. That same goes for Poseidon.
Yes.
I just don't think I could do it. I don't think my brain has the capacity to not immediately dissociate as that movie begins. But it's real. I feel like people feel like humans feel like they are the hottest thing on this planet. You know what I mean? Like they're the doing it. They're like, the planet will do what I want kind of deal. And it's like, the planet's been here. Shut up.
It's
like,
be here when it's gone.
I think it's like, too. Yeah. And it's like sad because disaster, is what disaster is. It's devastating. You have people you love who are dying, but that at the same time, the planet is doing what the planet's gonna do. Like, it's doing it. You know what I mean? Like, it's gonna murder all at once because it was here first. Mm-hmm. It is a giant, horrific murder beast, and it's going to do what it wishes. And we are either going to survive said things or we won't. And the world will go on. And it's sad as all get out. But the planet decides. The planet is the hottest thing on this planet. You know what I mean? It's not us. Mm-hmm. We're not forever. Eventually humans won't be anymore. And that's just going to be a thing.
Yeah.
And whatever other creature that is born will be like, what was that? What are these pyramids? What is this Sphinx? I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, they're going to see the things that are left behind and be like, that's strange.
Yeah. Or like maybe they'll see like the social media and the technology that is the history. Like, if we are able to preserve that, right, then we, technically still live on. We would just be a story. But yeah, it's very true that like the Earth is just going to, the
robots are the next.
Yeah. Because it might be, we can mess up the Earth so much, and then at some point it's just not going to be suitable for us. But the Earth's still going to be here. It's still going to be doing stuff. It just doesn't have people on it anymore because we all killed ourselves. Like, that's just how it works. And so it's like, this media serves to kind of warn us of that, and to warn us of like the isolationism, and to value where we come from, but also to be open and, understanding that we need each other. Like, we are, at the end of the day, all humans. We are humanity. Yeah. And so it's like, what do we do with that? So, and I think this whole series is going to be a lot of that. Next week, we're going to be talking about tsunamis, which scare Kat and I very much. Like, I love the beach. Again, I'm from Florida. I grew
I
up
hate
on
the
the beach.
But yes.
I grew up on the beach. I've been on cruise ships. I watched Poseidon. I was very scared, and I don't know if I'll ever be on a cruise ship again because of it. But yeah, it's it's real. So we'll talk about tsunamis next week. We have a bunch of other natural disasters to talk about this month. So I hope you enjoy it. Make sure that you like and subscribe, and watch our other stuff.
We need to leave the ocean alone.
Yeah.
Just let it be. Never go into it. Just stay far, far away.
Yeah. And also,
we isolate ourselves
green
from the
energy. Stop,
yes.
siphoning the the things from our Earth that is kind enough to let us live here, and stop doing that, and then we'll be fine.
Yeah. I'm like, history will remember what it does. We can't change it all. We can try. That's all we can do. Mm-hmm. And if we die and no one remembers our name, then that's sad. But it's what happens all the time.
Okay. Right?
You remember your family, and it's your job to carry the memories on. That's it.
It's your job to put them in the closet. When you don't be like,
not everyone gets a bench.
All right.
You know
well, yes, I know what you mean. If you could, if just for no, if you're gonna memorialize me as a bench, don't make it a bench that has the houseless person architecture where they put the bar in the middle, or they make it so people can't sleep there.
That's the worst.
Just so you know, just putting it here.
No, it's bench
exists.
for anybody.
Yeah, if there's a bench with my
name on it, I want to be a
tree. Anyone can
firmly.
Be there. Yes.
I wish to be a tree. I want my ashes to be put with tree, and then I grow into the flower leaves that happen, and then hopefully gross humans do not cut down my self that exists as tree now.
Okay. Yeah, you got it.
That's my dream.
Excellent.
I'm just letting you know.
That's the dream. So that was our episode about
Earthshake murder.
Our episode on Earthshake murder, which is real. It's scary. It's awful. And so next week we'll talk about water crash murder, too much water, real fast murder. So make sure you give us a comment as well. If you like this, if you have, disaster preparedness plans, please share them with us so that we can be more prepared as well. Okay, well, don't get married.
Do it. They'll eat your kids. Or the earth will.